And here we go. Hello, Andrew. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Good to see you, Alberto. I would prefer to do it in person, but through a StreamYard, LinkedIn, Zoom call is the next best thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and now we're not even living that far away because you recently relocated back in Portugal, right? Well,
Well,
back,
yeah,
not
back to
back.
back back to Europe, and to first time to Portugal. Yes,
Yes,
I'm a global.
We originally met in Singapore. What was 4 years ago, probably. The first
Yeah,
time, and during a convention. We are both part of the same association of public speakers, the
yeah.
Asian Association, and I was impressed when you walk on stage and you gave your. I mean, the first speech I saw of yours was one of the first during that convention, and I said, "Oh, I like this guy. I want to know more about him." And basically, I came after you, and you thought I wanted to pick your brain, but I wanted to be friends of you at first, okay, and see how it could go. And since then, we kept on talking. We did few things together. We contributed to some magazines with our articles, with our point of view, and I'm a big fan of yours. So thank you for
Well,
being with me.
well, thank you. It's my absolute pleasure, Alberto, and I'm a big fan of yours.
Thank you so much. Andrew, the reason why we are talking today is because I had the chance to read your last book, New Leadership Playbook. Okay, I've been impressed by the smoothness on how you wrote it. Okay, and the easiness to catch even complex concepts. And congratulations for that. I really appreciate it. But then I always put myself in a position, okay, being a leader in a different environment. You know, I've been living and working in China for 30 plus years. And I very often created some doubt to myself on how things could have gone if I have acted or reacted or enacted differently. And so being in a leader position is not easy when culture background is different. Okay, and I wanted to talk to you about this and with your experience because you lived for many years in Singapore, and your major clients are from East Asian countries, and you've been dealing with them a lot. And I guess you also had those what I call a cultural crash sometimes, where things which were obvious to you were not to them, and vice versa. Okay, so today I'd like to go through part of your experience, okay, and maybe some anecdotes that you could share with us to let us more understand and feel more comfortable on how things get um, into practice. And I already received a few questions. I've been a week since I posted our first um, interview for today. And yeah, but why don't we start first from your last post of yesterday on LinkedIn? You said I went on an AI interface and I asked artificial intelligence what is a self-leadership definition. So basically, you came out with this situation where uh, there are two different descriptions of the same concept. One is created by the artificial intelligence, and the other one is what you wrote in your book. Okay, uh, what was your impression? What do artificial intelligence know more than we do, or what?
No, they don't know more than we do. That would be a misunderstanding. What artificial intelligence is able to do is to curate what we know. And so I actually thought that the artificial intelligence really curated the answer very well, and captured the essence. Whether it knows more than, I don't believe it can, because it's only collecting the data of. I'm not the only person who's written a book on self leadership. In fact, I didn't even come up with the term. I wrote about my first, I think, post about self leadership was in 1999, but Charles Mantz wrote about it in 1987. So I can't even claim to be the first user. And the concept of self leadership goes back to Lao Tzu or Plato or Epictetus, the Stoic philosophers. So I don't think AI has come up with anything new, but what I think it's done is curated it very nicely. But I wonder if the audience, would like to say whether it's the first or the second definition is AI or mine. So there's the question, right? Did you get it right?
I got it right. Yes, absolutely. And
Good.
it was very interesting because before you posted this, I already did my research on OpenAI to check what was the definition for self-leadership. And I got few answers. Obviously, I didn't go back and check which one was based on your books or anybody else's book, but it was very interesting that the approach to it is very similar. Would you like, in few words, to give the perfect definitions, but very few words of self-leadership?
Absolutely. So there are two definitions there. The first one, by the way, is the one from AI. The second one was one of the definitions in my 2012 book on the same name. But I think the most succinct definition is that self-leadership is a practice of intentionally influencing your thinking, feeling, and actions towards your objectives. So it is a practice of intentionally influencing thinking and feeling. and I like that because I believe both leadership and self-leadership are a practice. Just as taking a shower is a practice. Its effect is not permanent. If you don't take a shower for a few days, the result is obvious. So we need to practice our self-leadership just as we need to practice leadership. And I think that is the first reframe or insight that anybody that is traveling cross-culturally needs to understand, is that leadership is a practice. What worked for me in one scenario and situation is not going to work for me in all situations. I need to practice leadership.
Good. Okay. And do in this week's I received several questions on private messages. Okay, and I tried to sum them up to 5 basic questions. Later on during the live, we will have most probably people who are going to join with their questions. Okay, and we will be able to answer them directly. By the way, I see Doge online. He wrote in Chinese "Tachahao," which means everybody's hi. Okay, and then there is Julia. Okay, Julia, she says, nice to see you both. Okay, this is very good. Okay, but the first questions which I'd like to mention is what are the essential natural qualities of a good leader, and what are the skills that you can acquire over time?
Okay, so it's a big question, and I've already alluded to the fact that leadership is a practice. And within that question is a presupposition: what are the natural qualities? And that is an age-old discussion. Are leaders born or are they made? Now, there is an argument that leaders are born, because you can go into the playground of any school and you will see certain individuals leading the games, leading the kids towards either good behaviors or bad behaviors. So there are certain people that seem to be born with a natural ability to enthuse others to want to follow them. However, leadership is not natural. It is developed and it is grown, because leadership in itself is 3 components: the leader's style, the follower's motivation and skills, and, as I previously mentioned, the environment or the context. So somebody can be a good leader in certain contexts, but they're not necessarily leaders across all contexts. I'm British by birth. I'm also Australian by passport, Brazilian by wife, and having lived in Asia for 17 years and now back in Europe. But being British by birth, I grew up with Winston Churchill as an icon of leadership. However, if you look at Winston Churchill through his life, he was an abject failure as a leader for most of his life. And he's disliked by many countries. India, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand wouldn't look highly at him because he was very colonial in his style. But at one time in history that needed a directive leader, Winston Churchill was in the right place at the right time. So what are the natural qualities? The natural quality is to be self-aware of your own default leadership style.
Okay.
To be other aware of what are the motivations, the drivers of the people I want to lead. to be situational aware. In what context am I leading? And then having self-regulation, the ability to adjust my leadership style to appropriately meet my followers' motivation, and have the self-learning to take the feedback and to make the adjustments if I don't get it right. Now, kudos to you, Alberto. You, in our introduction, with your time in leading businesses in China, you said, hey, I tried some things and I've reflected. Did I do it right? Did I not? That is self-learning. And if you say, is there a natural quality or is there a developed quality? That ability to learn from mistakes, to take the feedback, make adjustments, and to advance, I think is a key component of an effective leader, particularly in a post-pandemic world.
Yeah, this is a very good point. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I always doubt about my leadership skills when I started, even today, because maybe the surrounding changes, the position you cover within the time changes. You get to a different level of communication with the projects you bring ahead, with the clients you talk to, and with the employees you employees. But it comes always to a personal matters. I believe that whenever I take a decision, I always put myself as a father to the problem, to the situations. So as a good father, what would I say? What would I do? And I would act. I recall one of my biggest failures in terms of management. I did it. It was in the middle 90s, maybe 93, 94. Okay. And I was running a big company in Taiwan. And I had a very good employee. She was perfect in doing anything. She could have taken my position in the company. And as a matter of fact, I really felt safe and relaxed whenever I had to leave for a business trip. And one day I was in a rush to get a prospect printed, an Excel file had to be printed, and asked her if she could have done it for me. But I wasn't getting any feedback after a few minutes, and I was in a rush for that. So I went straight to her in the middle of the office. It was an open space. And I talked to her. Is it possible that you are not able to print out an Excel spreadsheet? Okay. With a pretty arrogant attitude and, impatience within the words. Okay. I didn't offend her directly. I didn't mean anything bad to her, but I was just in a rush to do it. Okay. She was able to come back to me 30 seconds later with a sheet. And then I didn't see her anymore from the day after. She didn't come back to the office. It took a long time for me to understand what was the problem behind. Okay. I was worried about her. I should have been more worried about me. So I failed in leadership at that moment because I let her lose her face in front of other employees. Okay. Because I kind of shouted under her point of view. And I wasn't very, very nice. And that made me feel like really, really a bad boss. Okay. So I felt that I was missing something important. But within the time, I made many other mistakes. But of course, all of those mistakes, always helped me to understand better who I was, what was my position, and what I wanted to obtain. Because one thing I understood, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that leadership, in particular when you are not in your own country, that means that people don't have the same cultural background of you, okay, have a different impact on people. And people may not be very strict. And here comes my second questions to you, okay? And it goes like, does ethic have a universal values, or does it change according to the cultures? And what is your opinion about it, of course?
Okay, it's a good question. And again, within the question is embedded a couple of concepts or ideas. And I think it's important that we understand those. So we could turn the word ethic into the word principle. And you mentioned in your story, in your narrative, and by the way, kudos, congratulations for taking the step back, reflecting what could I have done differently, because that answers our first question. What is a natural talent of a leader? The ability to self-reflect, with self-awareness and self-learn, and then regulate yourself and go, hey, I'm never going to react that way again. So I think there are certain universal principles that are fairly clearly obvious. The fact that we have to have commandments, thou shalt not murder, that seems to me fairly obvious. Thou shalt not steal, that seems to me to be fairly obvious and universal as a humanist. Anybody that has any respect for another human being. So I think there are certain universal principles. And I talked about principles in the new Leadership Playbook. This is my 2022 book, which you just read. And I talked about principles rather than values, because I think principles are universal. If I pick up a pen off my desk and then let go of that pen, it is universal on this planet that the pen will drop to the desk, because gravity, or the effect of gravity, is it's certainly global, if not universal. There are places in the universe where it doesn't occur the same way. So an ethical or a principle is there. Being human, respecting other humans should be universal. In fact, the subtitle of that book is Being Human Whilst Delivering Accelerated Results. And I think it's universal that if we don't deliver results, at some point our tenure will be terminated, right? Because nobody's going to get hired as an employee or as a leader if they don't deliver results. But I think it's universal that if we don't look after our people, then they will leave, as you experience. So now, what changes in terms of culture? Well, there are a lot of cultural experts, and what is valued from country to country does change. And of course, in Asian countries, the value of harmony is a huge value, right? And so that drives interesting behaviors, right? And that value of harmony drives a concept of humility. But when somebody says, I value humility, then they've got to look at the principle behind something like humility. So the value of humility is, I want to be humble. I want to make myself smaller. I want to be part of the collective. Whereas the principle of humility is the principle of being grounded. And humility means having an accurate, neither underestimated nor overestimated view of your own abilities. Now, so the principle should be universal, but the practice of that value, or that principle becomes a value, is different in different cultures.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So as a global speaker, I've spoken and worked in over 20 countries, and I make sure that I'm sensitive to the culture that I go. I've recently been doing a fair amount of work in Sweden, and Sweden's interesting in terms of its value. They value autonomy, self-rule very highly. And yet they're very Asian in the sense that they always make their decisions collectively. This is an interesting paradox. In the new Leadership Playbook, I talk about the Japanese concept of decision-making, nemawashi, which means from digging around the roots of a tree. The term comes from gardening. And whereas in the West, we know we tend to value very quick, autonomous decision-making. So the value will change depending on culture. I think it's worth checking what is the principle behind. So I think value is the application of principles in context. That's how I would answer that question.
Absolutely agree. Well, it's very interesting. I agree with you about the Swedish, and I've done quite some business with Swedish company, and I realize that when it's time to take a decision, they are collectively taking it, but then it comes a very personal who's taking the lead of their positions. And I agree with you that Asians have harmony as a principle. Okay, even thought. I lived a lot of stress cultures in many companies, in particular in the manufacturing fields, where people are pressured to deliver results. There is this things that happened to me just a few weeks ago. I'm helping several European companies to deal business with China, and some of them asked me to sell to enter with their products into the Chinese market. And some other instead asked me to organize and make it simple and fluid, the sourcing of their products. Okay, so we will talk in more details about this, but the example I wanted to discuss is that one of the Chinese employees that was serving the clients I had, okay, came to me straight and on a private chat and asked me if I could help him to close the order before the end of the month, and for the clients. And I said, it's not a problem for me to confirm the order and make the payment to you today or next week. It's not a matter of when. It's a matter that everything will be correct in the order procedures. Okay, so tell me exactly why you need that. Okay, and he was humble enough to tell me, I need to close the budget for the month. Without your order, I won't be able to reach the budget I was assigned, and I may risk my position. Obviously, I had to think if it was something true or not, but he was humble enough to come straight to me. So I said, okay, I want to trust you. So it wouldn't have made any difference for me to pay on October 28 or on November 5. And so I did, okay, and he was very thankful to me. We're at the beginning of December now, and then a new employee comes to me and said, hi, I'm substituting the gentleman who used to talk to you. And I say, what happened to him? I said, oh, it's family matters. Okay. And then I contacted him back on his private chat. Okay. And I said, listen, what happened to you? I said, I wasn't able to reach a budget for the month of November. So they substituted me and they laid me off. So he was very honest in the first place, okay? And I gave him a chance to prove himself right to the company, but I wasn't able to prove himself right also for the next months, for the coming months. So he was very thankful to me, and I did something which proved to be right with your concept, with what you're saying. Okay, I wasn't doing that for getting the rewards. I was doing it in case of humanity. Okay, I mean, if someone comes and asks for help and I can do that, fine. Okay, otherwise I would have been more stick. Oh no, procedures need to be done in a different way. So I really see what you wrote on the books in what I actually do on a daily basis, and I am learning very much from you. Thank you, Andrea. So VA counts my. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, let me summarize that for the listeners, right? There's a very simple way of remembering this. And one of the things in terms of my writing is that I try and make things sticky. You know, how do we remember this? You know, we'll remember the story of you advancing payment for that employee, but what's the principle behind that? And the principle behind that is East, West, Sweden, China, Singapore, USA. People are people. And I think with that's the principle that we always need to remember. You know, we're always dealing with human beings. So human beings are driven by needs, wants, and beliefs. I need something, I want something, or I believe in something. So the self-leadership is to be aware of what do I need, want, and believe. And if we can then articulate that, we can be assertive, not passive aggressive. Right? So aggressive is, here's what I want, you know, give it to me now. And that was the example that you gave of the office manager that you had that couldn't print an Excel spreadsheet, right? I need this, I want it now. And you hadn't considered, well, what's her needs, what's her wants, what's her beliefs. Now, in the second story that you tell, this individual was articulating, I need this because I want to achieve my target by the end, right? And you said, well, I believe that this doesn't cost me one thing or another, so I'm happy to achieve this. Now, from a negotiation perspective, you could have asked for something in return. You didn't, but what you did was you got his eternal gratitude. So sometimes that's money in the bank.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a very good example to me. I mean, it's being a leader means sometimes to let go also, you know, just put yourself in the other people's shoes and feel their pains, their problems, their troubles, and understand if there is a difficult situation to handle. Okay, so
yeah, I'm gonna sort of beg to differ there. It's put yourself in other people's shoes is to understand what they need, want, and believe.
Sure.
As a leader, I don't think we ever get to totally let go, because leadership is about delegation, not abdication. Right.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I absolutely understand what you were saying, but for me, words, as a writer, as a speaker, words matter. And I think we can give a long rope, right? We can empower people, but I don't think as a leader we ever get to let go, because that is our responsibility and accountability as a leader. Is the buck stops here. So as much of a long rope we have, I think you'll agree, as having run companies yourself, that you never really get to let go completely.
Uh, Absolutely. I had my other um, my other weapons in my pocket. Don't worry about it. Okay. So anyway, it was a simple thing that I could easily do. Okay. Yeah, but this brings the third questions, which I received from someone who read your book actually. Okay. So the
Oh,
question is, you wrote on your book, "Cultures Eat Strategy for Breakfast." Now, who read the book from the first page to the last page may understand this. But if I come out to you and say, culture, it's strategy for breakfast, okay, what do you exactly mean?
well, firstly, I wasn't the first person to write that. Peter Drucker, the 1980s 90s management guru, wrote that, and I borrowed that for him for the new Leadership Playbook. And I think anybody walks into an environment, and I already can tangibly feel that environment. So I spoke to you and everybody listening there. Leadership is a three-legged stool: the leader's style, the follower's motivation and skills, and the environment. So environment informs our behaviors so strongly. And I remember when I first moved to Singapore, one of my clients was Sentosa Leisure Group. And I'd been referred to them because I'd been doing some work for Singapore Airlines. And so I turned up to do a leadership training for the executive leadership team, which was the managing director and the heads of all the functions. And I turn up in my blue suit and tie. The CEO of Sentosa Leisure Group turns up in a Hawaiian shirt, because Sentosa Leisure Group is a leisure group. It was in charge of the island and the attractions. And later we got a casino and high-end real estate. And I turn up in a blue suit. And he said, "Andrew, if you want any respect around here, you'll lose the suit." And so this was a very tangible example of, how we need to lick our finger and what way is the wind blowing. A lot is talked about psychological safety for teams. This was some research that came out of Google, that the most important thing for productivity out of a team is that people feel psychologically safe. So what is the culture that allows people to feel safe? So you can have a strategy plan, but if people don't have buy-in to that, if people don't feel safe, if people don't feel that they belong, then that strategy will not survive. So as leaders, a real tangible test of our leadership is, what culture have we created? Do people instantly know how to behave in the environment that we've led? When somebody new arrives, they can feel the wind. They go, "Oh, this is the way that we behave." Now, I mentioned Google, and a lot of people were very interested when Google had the free canteen for staff and the colored bean bags, etc. And some people tried to just duplicate the bean bags, but they hadn't really understood the culture that drives the behavior. That somebody can sleep in the middle of the day in a hammock, but they'd worked all night on a piece of code that they needed to deliver. So human beings are very sensitive. You walk into a bar somewhere in the world, and instantly you know whether you feel welcome or you feel like your life is at risk and you need to leave very rapidly. You can just smell the culture of that and instantly react. So any workplace is the same. Build a culture as a leader where people feel that they belong, that they feel empowered, and most importantly, is that they have a purpose and a mission to achieve.
Absolutely. What would you suggest to someone, okay, who has been assigned a new job, and he doesn't feel comfortable in the place? He walked, like you mentioned, he walked in the bar and doesn't feel welcome. Okay. What would
Okay.
you suggest him to do in that case?
Okay. Well, if you don't have the if you don't feel comfortable and you don't have the opportunity to exit, you ask questions. You find out what is the culture here, what is working. There's three questions that you can always ask when you walk into an environment. If you're a new manager taking over a team, you talk to your team and you say, "Hey, what do you like about working here?
Mhm.
What don't you like about working here? And what would you change if you could?" And you'll clearly get the key distinctions. And again, if you can then make those changes that people want, if they're in line with your purpose and mission, then you will engage people very rapidly. So ask questions. You know, be a diagnostician. So here's my story. I didn't start off as a leadership speaker, as an author. I started off my career as a physiotherapist. I'd originally intended to become a doctor, but they merged my boys' grammar school with the girls' high school just before university. And I'll leave it to everybody's imagination to wonder what happened to my focus. And I didn't get the grades to do medicine, but I did get the grades to do physiotherapy. I graduated as a physiotherapist in 1982. And I did a couple of years in hospitals, and then I started working with sports teams. And when I moved to Australia, I did the same thing. I was an entrepreneur. I set up a chain of practices, but I also worked with sports teams. And one managing director said, "Hey, you've helped our sports team to win. Now come work with my leadership team because they suck." Now, culturally, I hope everybody watching this, that suck is a word I can say on it. And so I had the imposter syndrome a little bit. I'm going, "Oh, I'm a physiotherapist and I understand human behavior, but I'm not sure I understand it in this business context." So I went with a blank notebook and a pen and I observed. Because what being a physiotherapist taught me is that prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. And as a physiotherapist, I got very good at observing how somebody runs or how somebody kicks the ball or how somebody hits the racket. And I also understood the psychology of when they lose a point, do they go to pieces or do they increase their focus? We all remember, well, I hope we all remember John McEnroe throwing his racket, right? Or Andre Agassi going through a slump in tennis and then getting his focus and coming back out the other side.
Mhm.
So when I did the transition from physiotherapy and wellness centers into business, I had a curious mind. I'm like, okay, how are people behaving, and what's driving that behavior, and what culturally is moderating that behavior? Because it's a system. And what also helped my diagnosis is that I had studied traditional Chinese medicine. I have a postgraduate in acupuncture. I understand 5 elements. And I understood that the Chinese approach to medicine is around influence, that one thing doesn't create a causation. Western thinking is very Aristotelian, cause and effect. But in Chinese medicine, you don't get sick because it's hot. You get sick because it's hot and damp or hot and windy. You don't get sick because it's cold. You get sick because it's cold and damp and cold and windy, right? So it is a confluence of events. So my observation was always looking for, well, what's the system? What's driving people and how are people driving the system? And that gave me a unique approach. Now, like you, I had a little imposter syndrome. So I went off to do an MBA to legitimize my leadership consultancy. But because I had already worked with companies, because I had already got results, I argued with my university lecturers. And I had one lecturer who I'm very grateful to because he said, "Hey, Andrew, you've got some great ideas. Why don't you go and write your own book?" And so the rest, as they say, is history.
Fantastic. I like your stories. I really enjoy listening to your background stories. And I remember when you mentioned to me about your first speech that was in a pub, and you were wondering who's gonna show up for to listen to you. Okay, and the feeling that it gave me when you were telling it, something that really changed the prospect of your future business life, and I appreciate very much why you're sharing it with us.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Well, that story is, always about nobody's going to back you if you're not prepared to back yourself. So,
Absolutely.
I invested in hiring the space and putting on the breakfast and then selling the tickets. And then people did come and people gave me the feedback. So, the principle here is nobody's going to back you unless you're prepared to back yourself. And so anybody listening today, let that be your takeaway. How much are you backing yourself? This is
Yeah.
a component of self-leadership, which is called self-efficacy. There's self-confidence. I've done it before, I'm doing it now. But self-efficacy is this ability to, try something new, even when you don't know exactly how it's going to turn out, but to be able to take the feedback, make the adjustments, and make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I relate 100% to it. I also see it. When I first decided to move to Asia, I was 19 years old, and I had a good job back in Europe, and everybody asked me, "Why are you doing that? I mean, why are you quitting your job and going to some place that you don't speak the language, you don't understand, you don't know what's going to happen to you?" I say, "Well, at the end, it's going to be a good experience. Okay, so why not doing it now? But I I can fail, okay, rather than waiting for time to be grown up and maybe really hurting myself with any failures. Okay, I was lucky, I have to admit. Okay, but it was
Well, luck is laboring under correct knowledge. It's an acronym, right? So clearly you had an open rather than a fixed mindset. And your psychometrics probably show that you have quite a high level of openness to experience. So those are clear traits of entrepreneurs. If you have a fixed mindset, it's very black and white thinking, it's very rigid, and a lack of openness to experience means, well, I'm not going to try anything new. Now, I left home at 18, but I left home at 18, went to university, but I left England for Australia at 25. I almost spoke the language. Clearly, there are some language differences between my terribly posh British accent and Australia, where so I had to adapt a little. But it is that willingness. And I think, clearly around the world, when I work with people, I ask them what their early experiences are. Those that did travel early tend to have that much more risk embracing, I'll work it out kind of mindset than people who have, never left their own town or state.
absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so this is a good a good hook to my next questions. Okay, and my next question is very straightforward. Okay, again, taking it from your book, from the new leadership playbook. Um, you wrote, "Put the fish on the table." Can you give me some practical example on what you really mean with that?
Yeah. So actually, I mean, you should be familiar with this. I think it's a Southern Italian expression to put the fish on the table, because if a
Is
fish is
it?
under the table, sorry,
Yeah.
yeah,
Is it?
yeah.
I mean, I
I,
never heard it in Southern Italy.
Oh, well, maybe somebody, I don't know where it comes from, but I love it as a visual metaphor for bringing things out into the open. If you put, if the fish is under the table, it can rot and stink. But if we put the fish on the table, we can cook it and eat it together. So putting the fish on the table is one of the plays in the new leadership playbook. It is a conversation. In fact, all of the plays are in fact a conversation. And I have redefined leadership as a conversation, one-to-one or one-to-many. But this conversation is one that many individuals in leadership positions or not fail to do, is that they have something they're upset about, something that's not working, and they don't bring it out into the open because they are terrified of speaking up because they don't want to offend anybody. And this is the classic excuse for not speaking up. I don't want to offend anybody. But the ability to comfortably say, hey, Alberto, this thing happened, X happened, right? When X happened, I felt Y. So the key of self-leadership is always to own our emotions, right? So, let's say, I don't know, let's say you are late to a meeting with me, and I could say, hey, Alberto, you were late to a meeting. When that happens, when somebody's late to a meeting, I feel disrespected, right? So that's the opening to a put the fish on the table conversation, because I'm saying this happened. You were late to the meeting, but it's not you made me feel frustrated, disrespected. This is how I feel, right?
Okay.
So, and the fish on the table is then I need to understand, was that your intention? Did something else happen? And moving forward, how can we both avoid this happening again, right? So I need to, change my diary a little bit if I know I'm having a meeting with somebody who is perpetually going to be half an hour late, or do we need to agree that next meeting it's going to be exactly on time? So that's a very simple example to show you the structure. When this happened, this is how I felt. Now, my request to you would be that you moderate the behavior, or do I need to update my mental map because I got upset about something that I shouldn't have got upset about? Right?
I do have, however, another reading of this situation. Okay, I mean, should I be late? And when I come, you just then bring the fish on the table and you tell me, Alberto, you were late. Okay, and this is make me kind of anxious or uncomfortable. I have other things to do. It could be also a situation where you take an advantage toward my position, and put me in a faulty position. Okay, this could be on a strategy plan. Okay, to put the other one on a difficult on the difficult sides. I don't know. I could feel like that also.
Okay. So everything is about positive intention, right? And
Exactly.
as a human
That's why I'm
being,
looking this up. Just
so
to make
everything's
it.
about we often forget the positive intention, right? So there is a bias that we have. It's called attribution bias. That if we're late, clearly things happened outside of our control. The traffic was bad, the weather was bad, something happened, and so we positively attribute to ourselves an excuse, but we don't give that attribution to other people, right? So there is an element of our own bias that has to happen in a fish on the table conversation. Now, if you were late to a meeting one time, then we wouldn't need a fish on the table conversation. Hey, it's no big deal. You were late. I drank some coffee, no biggie. But if you were an employee and you were repeatedly late, then we need to have a fish on the table conversation, right? I was recently coaching an executive who had another executive reportee, and they were saying things to other divisions about their boss.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is clearly a situation that you cannot allow to be perpetuated. If one of your team is speaking out of turn and negatively about you outside of the team to other divisions, then that clearly is a problem. That person needs to be bought in and said, look, I'm aware that this is happening. This obviously makes me feel uncomfortable. What is your intention in doing this? Because this is a situation that needs to be resolved. That is a clear fish on the table conversation.
Fantastic. Absolutely. I also can add that if someone feels on a difficult position just because he arrived late, okay, that means that he has a guilty conscience because he's always arriving late.
Okay, so forgive me for using such an oversimplistic example.
No. It's not oversimplistic,
Yeah,
it's perfect.
If you read my work, and if you know that if you can go to the smallest common denominator that's a shared experience, so that we can articulate the principle without it getting wrapped up in nuance and culture, because then it can get very, very foggy. And so if I got a great piece of feedback from somebody I respect very much who read the book and said, "Hey, Andrew, I appreciate that the book isn't very long." And I was like, "Oh, hang on a moment, that doesn't feel good." He said, "Because there's so much information in it. I realize you must have spent a lot of time, paring it down." And I was like, "Yeah, that's actually great feedback, because it takes longer to make something succinct."
Absolutely.
And as leaders, that's something we should practice when we are speaking, when we are telling a story, when we are communicating, is to be is to practice getting very succinct so that our message lands and is universally understood. And that's a lot of coaching I do, is to say, that message was too long. How do we make it shorter, sharper, more impactful, and more memorable?
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. I mentioned about that just because I'm always on time or advanced on time. I always try to be much earlier to the appointment. This is an attitude that makes me more relaxed and setting all things down even before I have to meet with people, and gives me time to show them that they can take their time as long as we are on the same page without having anyone to wait for the other. Andrew, you and I have a lot of friends in common. Okay, and I know you have coached and mentored several business owners and entrepreneurs, Western entrepreneurs who live and run the business in China. Okay, and I was surprised at first, when I got to know that he or she was working with you. Okay, I go like, wow. I mean, I should know a little bit more about it. Okay, but the question is not what you mentor them, but it is more likely, how would you help them to overcome certain situations that are a cultural contrast to each other. Running a business in China as a foreigner is not for hard-thinking. It's something that is difficult. It's hard. It's confusional. It's whenever I do business, I always realize that I'm not doing business itself, but I am doing a cultural moderator between two different parties. Okay, and this is helping me to let people understand which stage and which position they need to take in between the business deal. Okay, so but you train these important managers and business owners to run their companies, or to control their feelings on running their companies and bring them on a higher level. Was it any big difference between doing this for people who run their business in Western countries rather than running their business in Europe, in China, or is it approximately on the same level?
Well, let me share my approach. I don't know whether it's more difficult or not. So one of the things that as a mentor or coach, I train myself to do is to turn up with that blank sheet of paper and a pen. So I use that story because that's how I became successful, is not having a model, having a solution, and turning up with my solution and saying, okay, this is going to solve the problem for you. And we know a lot of very successful consulting companies have that model. Oh, you have that. Well, here we have the solution. I have a very much open-minded point. I have a belief that there always is a solution, but first I need to understand the needs, wants, and beliefs, as I mentioned before. So I think sometimes when working with a different culture, it's a lot easier for me to have a blank page because I'm not turning up with my own, educated white 61-year-old male perspective. So I know of one of those, immediately it jumps to mind, one of those people to whom you speak, who sought me out, traveled from China to meet with me and say, how do I do this? And I said, well, okay, what is it you're trying to achieve? What is your internal narrative about this? What are you saying to yourself? And what are the cultural environmental cues that you're hearing from others in terms of when your messaging goes out, what comes back? So I'm able then to map out the system and say, okay, this is where you are in the system. This is what the system is giving back to you. Where is the point of leverage in that system for you to achieve what you want to do? So my skill is in working both on the inner narrative and the outer narrative. Because a lot of what is culture is a narrative. This is how we do things here. Whether it's this is how we do things in XYZ company, or this is how we do things in XYZ country. And having traveled and spoken and worked in, as I said, in over 20 countries, I also know that culture changes, even within a country. I mean, India, for instance, is an entire continent. It's not just one country. They have different religious festivals in the south and the north. So I operate with a couple of principles: that people are people and there is always a solution. but I can't get to the solution unless I find the needs.
Absolutely, absolutely. So everything starts from a blank sheet of paper and a pen, okay, and a
Yeah.
pencil. So you basically had a transformation from a physiotherapist to psychotherapist.
Yeah, yeah. The psychotherapist actually, just like physiotherapist, is a registered term. But yeah, I am kind of a corporate psychologist. I had an entrepreneur was referred to me. He needed some transformation for a company he was running. And he was saying, oh, I need somebody inside to, work with their minds and their performance. And I said, well, have you seen the TV show Billions? He said, I have. You're Wendy. And I said, yeah, I could be your Wendy. Now, if people don't know that TV reference of the TV show Billions, it's going to be lost on you. But this was an organization that had a corporate psychologist who made sure all of the traders within the organization were on their A game. And
Should I call you?
So go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Should I call you Wendy from now on?
I'd rather you didn't. I took it as it was, and again, this was an example of shortening the conversation by finding a narrative. I picked up, he was looking for a Wendy.
Absolutely,
we had a
yeah.
shared reference. We both knew the TV show, and therefore, we connected very quickly. And that's the important, that's what's difficult when you're in different cultures, is you don't necessarily have the shortcut to understanding. Right?
Absolutely.
So, when I moved to Singapore, I read Lee Kuan Yew's autobiography because I needed to understand the cultural shortcuts to work with the Singaporeans. What is it that's driving them? When you went to China, you might have done it intentionally or unconsciously. You started to pick up the corporate, the cultural shortcuts. The story about the farmer and the 5 cows, or whatever that is, and that's a cultural shortcut to a shared understanding.
Yeah.
Now, when we stay in our own culture, we tend to assume that everybody knows what those mean, right? We were mentioning Sweden earlier, and they have this great saying to take a poop in a blue wardrobe or a blue cupboard. Now, I don't know what it means. Ask a Swedish person about taking a poop or a dump in a blue cupboard. It means something to them. It doesn't mean anything to me, and it doesn't mean anything to you. But your next Swedish person, ask them about that.
Yeah. Okay, Andrew. Let me ask you the very, very last questions. Okay. This is also coming from one of my followers. Okay, and says, okay, how has leadership changed after COVID-19?
Well, in some places it has, in some places it hasn't. What I think has changed more than leadership is followership has changed very much since COVID-19, and since an effective leader adjusts to their followers' motivation and skills, therefore leadership has changed. So here's what I think has changed with followership from all the interviews and the research that I have read, the interviews I've done and the research I've read, is that people have had a dose of autonomy and ownership, right? As we work, it's been a global experiment in working from home and hybrid working. And because we're working from home, we had to be much more autonomous. We had to adjust our own schedules. We had to work out our workflows. We had to adapt to new technologies. And so we were much more in control as employees. And then if managers and leaders came back and said, okay, COVID is over, you're going back to your cubicle and I'm going to go back to micromanaging you again, then people said, oh, no, I'm not doing that. And then we had the great resignation. We had a huge number of people on the move or just stepping out of the workforce because they go, I've had a lick of the ice cream. I know what controlling my own productivity feels like. I don't want to give that up. And so what's significantly changed is that managers need to stop broadcasting. Here's what I need you to do, and start dialoguing. Now, even on platforms like Yelp or like Yammer or like Slack, and stop just saying what you need. Get people involved in that autonomy. Hey, here's the challenge we're facing. Tell us what your ideas are. A CEO once said to me, nobody has a monopoly on a good idea. Get everybody as much as possible to input into the decision, get the buy-in, get that ownership. And people who are able to do that effectively, one-to-one, one-to-many, and across virtual environments, take the questions from the audience, as you have done, respond to those. That's what's changed, because that's much more effective. That is, as the subtitle of my book is, Being Human Whilst Delivering Accelerated Results.
Perfect. We're almost got to the 1 hour spot, which we gave us as a limit. Okay. I wanted to show everybody online the cover of your book. Okay. And this is Amazon.com. So I guess in any Amazon countries, okay, can be bought at the similar price. Okay. So it's available for reading. This is a perfect solution for anybody who wants to understand more how to improve himself in terms of leadership. Self-leadership is not just a matter of managing yourself within a company. Self-leadership is a matter of being yourself in a good proposition towards anyone's around you. So from family matters to business matters, that's what it counts. And yeah, have you anything else you'd like to add to any tips you'd like to give us before we go?
Well, I'd just like to say, well, thank you for sharing the book. It's a book that people are reading and buying for every member of their team. If you want to know more about self-leadership, just go to selfleadership.com. That's my homepage, and that'll take you off to all the other things that I do around self-leadership, the speaking or the coaching. Look, you can't lead others unless you first lead yourself. So going back to where we started, having the self-awareness, spending time on reflection and asking yourself, how can I accept the current reality, adjust my behaviors to advance towards my objectives? You know, we're coming to the end of the year. It's 2023. It's going to be some challenges ahead too. However, you know, the Stoic philosophy is the ability to accept and face the reality whilst never losing the faith that you will succeed. And you and I, Alberto, we've both faced our challenges in life, but we never lost the faith that we would prevail. And that's what I would encourage everybody watching to buy into that.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for being with us. I learned a lot. I'm sure a lot of people will be able to review this video, of which will be available on YouTube and any other channels. It's been great talking to you. I really look forward to meeting you in person for some good time together like we used to do in Singapore, okay? Andrew, thank you very much.
Grazie mille.
You're the most welcome. Prego, non c'è di che. Say everybody. Have a good day. Ciao.
Ciao.